Montana Territory, late October 1886. The wind came down from the Rockies like a promise of what was coming. Cold that could kill, storms that buried entire homesteads, winters that separated the survivors from the dreamers. Jacob Wehrman, the most respected carpenter in Judith Basin, stood at the edge of Thomas Ericsson's property and watched the Norwegian dig into the hillside. Wehrman shook his head slowly. "That's not a barn," he said loud enough for others to hear. "That's a grave waiting to happen." What Ericsson was building looked wrong to everyone who saw it, while his neighbors raised timber frames skyward. He was going down, 8 feet down into the south-facing slope, carving a shelter into the earth itself. The idea seemed insane. Backwards. Dangerous. But here's what nobody asked. What did this quiet horse breeder understand about winter that the experts have forgotten? Today, you're going to see why the worst idea in Montana became the most copied design in the territory, and the number that made every critic go silent. Before we go further, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. Every week, I bring you a real frontier technique that worked when life and death hung in the balance, methods that were tested by blizzards, not theories. And drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Now, let's dig into what happened next. Thomas Ericsson had come from Norway in 1878 with his wife and a breeding pair of Norwegian Fjord horses. Compact, powerful animals built for mountain work. By 1886, he'd built his herd to 6 horses, each one worth more than most men earned in half a year. But Montana winters were killing his investment. The standard barn in Judith Basin was a simple structure. Thin timber walls, elevated floor to keep hay dry, tall enough for a man to work standing. It looked right. It felt like civilization. But every winter, the same problems came back like a curse. Wind cut through the gaps between boards. Horses burned calories just shivering, losing weight even when hay was plentiful. Draft from below made the floor so cold that standing became painful. Water froze in the troughs within hours. And the worst part, the respiratory issues. Dust, cold air, and dampness from breath condensing on cold walls created a perfect environment for pneumonia. Previous winter, Ericsson had lost 3 horses. 2 foals to cold stress, 1 mare to lung disease. His neighbors were losing 10 to 20% of their stock annually, and everyone just accepted it as the cost of ranching in Montana. But Ericsson had grown up in a place where winter was longer and colder than anything Montana could offer. And in Norway, the old farmers didn't fight the earth. They used it. So in October, when he should have been stacking hay and reinforcing walls, Thomas Ericsson started digging into the hillside behind his property. He was building his barn 8 feet below ground level, with stone foundation walls 2 feet thick and a roof that would be buried under 18 inches of sod. His neighbors thought he'd lost his mind. The design was precise, calculated, and completely unlike anything being built in Montana territory. Ericsson excavated 8 feet into a south-facing slope. South, because that's where winter sun comes from, even at 47 degrees north latitude. The back wall went deep into undisturbed earth where temperature stays constant year-round. Stone foundation walls rose 2 feet thick, made from sandstone blocks he'd hauled from a quarry 15 miles away. The timber roof frame was solid, thick beams supporting planks, but then came the part that made people stare. He covered it with 18 inches of sod, not shingles, not tar paper, grass and earth, heavy and dark, like he was burying the whole structure. There was only one entrance, a tunnel 12 feet long with a gradual ramp, just wide enough for a horse to walk through comfortably. At the rear of the barn, a single ventilation shaft 6 inches in diameter rose through the roof, angled to prevent rain and snow from entering directly. Inside, the floor was packed earth covered with 4 inches of sand for drainage, then deep straw bedding. 6 stalls lined the walls. No windows, no second door, just stone, earth, and timber. The engineering was simple but intentional. The thick stone walls would absorb heat during the day and release it slowly at night. The earth roof provided massive insulation, far more than any amount of timber could offer. The single entrance minimized heat loss, while the ventilation shaft allowed moisture and ammonia from manure to escape without creating drafts. But to every experienced builder and rancher who saw it, the design looked like a death trap. Jacob Wehrman made his opinion clear to anyone who'd listen. "I've been building in this territory for 30 years, he said at the general store in Lewistown. "I've seen mine collapses. I've pulled bodies out of dugouts that caved in. That Norwegian's putting 1,000 pounds of wet earth over his horses' heads. And when it comes down, and it will come down, those animals will be buried alive." Dr. Phelps, the traveling veterinarian who serviced ranches from Great Falls to Billings, was even more direct. He stopped at Erickson's property in early November and walked through the half-finished structure. "Horses need air and light, Mr. Erickson. They're not moles. This damp hole will breed pneumonia faster than any blizzard. You'll lose your entire herd before spring." The social judgment was just as harsh. At Sunday gatherings, the other ranchers joked about the Norwegian grave and Erickson's dirt coffin. One man said it plain: "This is what happens when foreigners don't listen to people who know the land. He's going to learn the hard way." 3 separate neighbors, good men who genuinely wanted to help, offered to assist Erickson in building a proper barn before winter came. They brought timber. They brought labor. They brought experience. Erickson thanked them and kept digging. "You don't understand Montana," they told him. "This isn't Norway." "No," Erickson replied quietly, loading another stone onto his cart. "But cold is cold and earth is earth." By late November, the barn was finished. The horses were moved inside, and Thomas Erickson waited for winter to prove him either brilliant or foolish. He didn't have to wait long. January 9th, 1887. The temperature in Judith Basin dropped to 46 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, 43 below on the Celsius scale. But the cold alone wasn't what made that winter legendary. It was the wind. For 6 consecutive days, wind sustained at 40 miles per hour tore across the plains. It didn't gust and calm. It just blew, constant and merciless, driving the wind chill so low that exposed skin would freeze in under 2 minutes. Snow came down in waves, 4 feet of accumulation in the first 72 hours, drifting to 12 feet in low areas. Ranches were cut off. No one could travel. Visibility dropped to near zero. For 11 days, the families scattered across Judith Basin were isolated, alone with whatever preparations they'd made and whatever shelter they'd built. In conventional barns, the war against winter was being lost. Wind found every gap between boards, every nail hole, every seam. Snow blew in through ventilation gaps and didn't melt. It just accumulated inside. The elevated floors that were supposed to keep hay dry became thermal bridges, conducting cold directly upward into the space where horses stood. Water froze solid within 2 hours of being carried from the well. Horses huddled together, burning calories to generate warmth, their breath condensing into frost that coated the walls and ceiling. Hay consumption doubled as their bodies fought to maintain core temperature. By day 4, supplies that should have lasted weeks were running dangerously low. And then the horses started dying. Not all at once, but in ones and twos, foals first, then older animals collapsing from exhaustion or just lying down the straw and not getting back up. Some ranchers tried bringing horses into their own homes, crowding them into root cellars or lean-tos attached to the house. At Thomas Erickson's property, neighbors expected the worst. That underground barn, that Norwegian grave, was surely the coldest, darkest, most miserable place in the entire territory. Stay with me, because what they found when the storm finally cleared humiliated every expert who'd said it couldn't work. January 20th. The wind stopped. Temperature rose to an almost reasonable 12 below. The sky cleared to that hard, brilliant blue that only comes after a major storm. And the men of Judith Basin started digging out, checking stock, and counting losses. Jacob Wehrman and 2 other ranchers made their way to Erickson's property, half expecting to find a collapsed roof and dead horses. What they found instead made no sense. The barn entrance was clear. Erickson had kept it shoveled. Inside, the 6 horses stood calm, alert, healthy. Their coats were clean. They weren't shivering. They weren't huddled. They looked like horses that had spent a quiet week in autumn, not animals that had just survived the worst blizzard in territorial memory. Wehrman pulled a thermometer from his coat. He'd been measuring his own barn all week. Outside temperature, 12 below zero. Inside Erickson's earth-sheltered barn, 41 degrees Fahrenheit, 5 degrees Celsius. Above freezing, comfortably above freezing. No stove, no fire, no heater of any kind. Just stone, earth, and a constant temperature of the ground 8 feet down. The hay consumption told the rest of the story. Ericsson's horses had eaten 12 to 14 pounds per day, their normal rate. In the conventional barns, horses had been consuming 24, 28 pounds per day, burning through supplies twice as fast just to stay alive. Water in Ericsson's wooden troughs stayed liquid. The horses drank normally, stayed hydrated, maintained body condition. In the other barns, water was a constant battle. Hauling, thawing, hauling again. By the time the counting was done, 3 horses were dead in the surrounding ranches. Multiple others showed severe weight loss. 8 to 12% of body weight gone. Ribs visible, eyes dull. Respiratory issues were everywhere. Coughing, labored breathing, nasal discharge. Ericsson's 6 horses hadn't lost a pound. Their lungs were clear. Their condition was perfect. 33 degrees Fahrenheit warmer inside than in a conventional barn, without burning a single log. His horses came out healthy while others came out sick, thin, and traumatized, if they came out at all. The proof was too stark to argue with. The numbers didn't care about opinions or experience or what should work. They just were. Jacob Wehrman came back in March. Not to criticize, to measure. He spent 2 hours inside Ericsson's barn with a notebook, sketching the stone wall thickness, the roof construction, the ventilation system, the entrance tunnel design. He asked questions like a student, not a master carpenter. The earth doesn't freeze 8 feet down, Ericsson explained. In Norway, we knew this. The ground holds steady, 45 to 55 degrees all winter. The stone walls absorb any heat the horses make and hold it. The sod roof stops wind, stops cold, stops everything. One entrance means a warm air stays inside instead of being pushed out by drafts. Dr. Phelps examined the horses that same month. He checked their lungs, their weight, their coats, their hooves. Healthiest stock I've seen come through that winter, he admitted. I was wrong about the ventilation. That shaft creates just enough air movement without creating drafts. The neighbors stopped joking. They started asking, how deep did you dig? Where did you source the stone? How do you keep the entrance from drifting shut? Can you show me the ventilation calculation? By fall of 1887, 4 ranchers in Judith Basin had started earth shelter barns. Some went full dugout like Ericsson's design. Others did partial earth sheltering. Conventional construction on 3 sides, backed into a hillside with earth bermed up the walls. By 1889, 19 variations existed within 80 miles. The technique spread through practical demonstration, not through persuasion. Men who'd lost horses to winter looked at men whose horses survived, and they adapted. The design became known regionally as the Norwegian barn or hillside stable. It entered the vernacular architecture of Montana Territory not because it was traditional, but because it worked when conventional wisdom failed. One rancher said it best. Ericsson wasn't being stubborn. He was being practical. The earth doesn't fight winter. It absorbs it, stores it, and gives it back slowly. We were the ones fighting, and we were losing. Here's what strikes me about Thomas Ericsson's story. He wasn't genius. He wasn't an engineer. He was just a man who paid attention to what worked in one cold place and asked if it might work in another. Modern construction assumes progress means building up and out, walls that stand proud, roofs that peak high, structures that announce themselves against the landscape. We equate exposure with control, as if forcing a building to face winter head-on proves our mastery over nature. But Ericsson understood something older. Thermal mass doesn't fight temperature swings. It dampens them. Earth 8 feet down sits at a constant 45 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, winter and summer, regardless of what's happening at the surface. That's not magic. That's physics. His stone walls absorb heat during the day and release it slowly through the night. A battery made of sandstone that charged and discharged in a cycle time to the animal's needs. The 18 inches of sod roof provided an R value that no practical thickness of timber could match. And the single entrance, which looked like a fire hazard to the experts, actually worked like an airlock, minimizing convective heat loss that drafty multi-door barns suffered constantly. What we call primitive was actually sophisticated passive engineering. What we call progress often means we've forgotten solutions that worked before we had the luxury of cheap energy to compensate for poor design. Earth shelter construction didn't die with the frontier. Root cellars still keep food cold without electricity. Ship homes in New Mexico maintain comfortable temperatures year-round with minimal heating and cooling. The principles that saved Ericsson's horses in 1887 can cut modern energy bills by 40 to 60%. Sometimes the craziest idea in a room is just the one we forgot to remember. And sometimes the expert telling you it can't work has never actually tried to make it work. They just assumed that the way things are done is the way things must be done. Thomas Ericsson's barn stood for 43 years before it was finally replaced. By then, the Norwegian grave had saved more livestock through Montana winters than any conventional barn in the county. So here's my question for you. Which part of the solution would you apply today in your home or property? Earth berming? Thermal mass walls? Single entrance design? And where are you watching from? Are you dealing with brutal winters right now? Or are you watching from somewhere warm, wondering why anyone would ever need to dig into a hillside? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. And if this story made you think differently about old techniques and modern assumptions, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the ground beneath your feet knows more than the expert standing on it.